Welcome to the Sisters in Crime Writers Podcast. Everyone has a unique writing journey, so join us for conversations about those journeys from the writers themselves. Hi, this is Julie Henricus, the Executive Director of Sisters in Crime, and I am delighted to welcome Kate B. Jackson to the podcast this week. When Kate B. Jackson, also known as KB Jackson, isn't writing about Sasquatch, secrets, and murder, she enjoys traveling with her trophy husband and their 4 grown children. She's a 2-time Agatha Award winner, 3-time Anthony Award finalist, and 2-time Silver Falchion Award nominated author of mysteries for both kids and for grownups. Kate, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I love Sisters in Crime.
Well, and we could talk about that for sure, but let's start where I always start with this. When did you say to yourself, I want to write a novel?
I was in college and working at a music store in Seattle in the early 90s at the height of grunge. And I would take my breaks and I would go with my little notebook and find a spot and start writing. But my problem was the finishing. So I would say I always wanted to be a writer, and it's come in fits and spurts over the years. But it wasn't until 2013, I'd been doing a blog, and somebody reached out to me and asked me to write a short story. And I said, I haven't written fiction in years. And she said, you have 2 weeks. And so I wrote a short story. And after I wrote the short story, completed the short story, and was like, oh, I've actually started and finished something. Maybe it's time to get back to writing that book that I started 10 years earlier. And so that's when I decided that I needed to do it, but it still took me another 4 years to finish it.
All right, so lots to unpack there. You're writing a blog, and you've got 2 weeks. I'm assuming this was for an anthology or for something that they wanted you to be a part of.
It's the Hurricane Review anthology from Pensacola State College. One of my classmates from high school was in the master's program there, and she was the editor. And so she said, I've been reading your blog. I think that you're a great writer. I would like you to try your hand at this. And can you throw in a couple of poems? And I'm like, that I haven't done poetry since high school. So.
But what a wonderful gift. So had you written short fiction before?
No.
Yeah.
No.
So,
no.
So that's hard to do, right? Under 5,000 words or wherever it was with the word count. How did you approach that? It's an incredible opportunity and
Right.
You're a smart woman, so you want to take advantage of these opportunities. But how did you approach it? Did you even know what kind of story you wanted to write?
I must have blocked it all out because I know that I'd been noodling a little bit of a story for a long time, just an idea. And I think the beauty of the short story was I could explore it without investing too much time into it. Mm-hmm. The story was called Flip Flop, and it was kind of inspired by some things that had happened. Just weird random experiences, like I got caught shaving my legs in the Walmart parking lot by somebody because I was going to a massage and I realized I hadn't shaved my legs. And so I stopped off at the Walmart and got a razor and was shaving my legs. And this guy gets out of his car and sees me, and, or just in general being at Walmart. And I think the reason it's called Flip Flop is it's like an emotion. It's a play on the word flip flop, but also, I literally had a flip-flop break, and I was walking with a broken flip-flop through a Walmart looking for a replacement pair. And so I had this idea that what if somebody approached this character and And basically there was kind of this clandestine encounter. And so I did it and I sent it to her and she said, my advisor says you're a good writer. And I was like, maybe I really should be doing this. And I think it was just that little bit of outside oomph, somebody that doesn't know me, somebody that looks at literature for a living and said, this is something that you should do.
So, and I think that outside validation is so helpful. And when people say something like that, I don't know that they understand the kindness that they do to somebody who maybe, because you have to have confidence to do this, but people telling you can is helps build that confidence for sure.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that then you started to think about writing a novel.
Yes. So I had started a novel in 2004. My husband was in timeshare, which is kind of like being in the military sometimes because you move around a lot. And we had been in Utah for 5 years and we had just moved to Southern California. We were in temporary housing, trying to figure out where we were going to live with our then 3 children. And I had been thinking a lot about a real incident in my family's past. My mother had her high school sweetheart went missing in 1967 and was never seen or heard again. And I knew enough bits and pieces about what had led up to that disappearance. And I always felt compelled to give the story that had no ending an ending. And so I started writing that story. And then I found out I was pregnant with my 4th child. We moved into another house. I lost the notebook that I'd been working on, and I was parenting 4 children. And so it just went to the wayside until I finished this short story. I was like, I think I want to try again. And I actually found the notebook from 10 years earlier in a box and started again. And then that story ended up morphing completely away from the initial true missing person story. So I decided to go ahead and write that again last year. And now I have a completely different version that's inspired by the same missing person case. But but it took me, I like to say it took me technically 14 years to write what ended up becoming my first grown-up book.
So let's start with the 14-year journey. So you write your short story, you get some confidence, then you have a 4th kid. So you're, cut to 10 years later, you're going through a box.
Actually, the short story was after that 10-year hiatus. So I'd started the novel when we first moved to California, and then a whole 5 years went by and we moved back to Washington. And then I was approached in 2013 or 2014 even to do the short story. And that's after I completed that, that's when I started really trying to finish that story.
So talk to me about that, because, you'd written this short fiction and you'd been working on a novel, but writing a novel requires learning craft, figuring out story structure, all this stuff. And also, as you alluded to at the beginning, finishing it so that you can fix it. And it's that finishing part that's so hard. And so many people don't get there because it is so much harder than you expect, and can be daunting because you have to go in and fix it afterwards. So talk to me about that, learning the craft of writing a novel.
Right. So one of the things that I discovered when I was writing the short story was that I've forgotten all the rules of punctuation. And I think some of them have changed too. The comma thing, I feel like, has changed quite a bit from when I went to the University of Washington. I had originally thought I was going to be an attorney, but the only classes I enjoyed were my English classes. And so I was like, I think I'll be an English major. But it had been a really long time since I had studied the craft of writing, other than being a reader, which I think obviously is important. But you don't necessarily read with the intent of looking for those things. You're just immersing yourself, hopefully, in the story. I didn't realize how much I, number one, had forgotten, and number two, never knew. And so I did struggle with that a lot. My novel ended at 153,000 words because I had no idea No idea. I didn't even know what the word query was. I mean, I knew nothing. I pantsed my way through it. There was very little plotting. I had one complete, throughout the book metaphor that ended up being completely axed and changed. It was a mishmash. It had an identity crisis. Somebody asked me what the genre was, and I was uh, like there's a mystery, but there's women's fiction and there's historical fiction. And so it was a mess. So somebody said, one of the best pieces of advice I got was, you don't have to put every book in your head into one book. So there will be more time to write other stories. You don't have to get everything into this. So let's take out what the real story is here and then go back. And so that was really helpful to me to figure out what it was that I had written and what I needed to do to rewrite. But I am a firm believer that finishing something changes you fundamentally. You go from being somebody who is an aspiring writer to being somebody who has completed a book, a piece of fiction, and that changes something in your brain, and it makes you've become a different person because you've done this work. You've stepped over that threshold that most people are afraid to step over. I have a friend that I started a little writing group with probably in like 2015, 2016, who had 100,000 word novel at that point. And it's another 10 years and that novel has never been completed. And she's a brilliant writer, but there is something psychologically that changes when you finish it. And then that's when the real work began for me, to understand all the things that I didn't know. So I started, I think I took every podcast class that was available because it was coming up. I think it was early in COVID. I was rewriting because I'd been querying and realized very quickly that nobody wants 153,000 word mystery. And so I think my fastest rejection was 6 hours from somebody who was like, oh, nope. So I did the Save the Cat writes a novel. I did something called, it's like a story circle or something. I can't remember, but I started taking every online class that I could find. I started taking Hallmark screenwriting classes, anything that was available. And I still, to this day, I just signed up for a writing intensive with Bob Dugoni and I think Stephen James in the fall. I am doing a master class at Thriller Fest this year from one of the authors that I don't think I've seen who I'm assigned to. I believe that I need to keep, this is an ongoing lesson to just continue to improve and get better.
Well, and also writers don't rest on their laurels. You don't say, well, I nailed this, so I'm just going to write the same kind of book next. It's, no, let's make it harder on myself. Let's switch up the genre. Let's add a point of view. Let's do whatever you can do to make your life miserable, a writer will do, because it's all right, I did that, so now let's try the next thing. I think it's a wonderful advice to tell people to keep going and taking classes and inspiring. Was it always going to be mystery for you?
I think so. I mean, I did try writing some romantic scenes in that first draft of that book, and I was so uncomfortable, and I felt my mother looking over my shoulder. And they were spicy romantic scenes, and I was like, I just don't think that that's me. I grew up in the golden age of television of the 80s mysteries and the Remington Steele and Murder She Wrote, but also Magnum PI detective shows. My mom got me into reading mysteries very young, probably absurdly young, junior high school. I was reading J.A. Jance, and some of her stuff's a little dark. Some of the Seattle-based mysteries. And then there were some cozy mysteries. I don't know if you know Mary Dahlheim. She was from this area. She had two series. One was the Bed and Breakfast Cozy series, and the other one was the Alpine, which I loved, the Alpine series. So I think to me, my brain has always been about trying to solve the puzzles, like
Yeah.
trying to understand things. I'm big into genealogy. I got into genetic genealogy in the advent of 23andMe. And so I just feel like there's so many aspects of life where there are questions, and I am curious about the answers. And so I think mystery transcends genre, but yeah, no, I dig a good twisty mystery.
I think you're right. I think mystery is the spine of, so, Dickens wrote mysteries. I mean, right? It's just we don't always label them as such, but it's such a part of the journey. I also love that you and your mom, had local authors who you're like, oh, this takes place here.
Yeah.
let me let me read this. That's exciting. I know this place.
Right.
That's kind of a great gift.
Well, and my mom and my relationship. I'm the youngest of the family, and I think I read my first book with chapters was a mystery. It was called Elizabeth Gale and the Mystery at Johnson Farm. And I was in the first grade, and I would read to my mom as she made dinner. And so it became an integral part of our relationship was, I would read Irma Bombeck to her, and I would, over the years, they became a little bit more mature, but no, I had a very strong reading foundation from the get-go. And we have another big author who is from our area, who is actually from the town that I grew up, which is Kristen Hanna. So Kristen Hanna is from Snohomish, which is my hometown, and she writes a lot about
Yeah.
growing up in our area.
Yeah, it's so cool. So you've written both adults and middle grade?
Yep, middle grade.
Yeah, middle grade. So let's talk about that, because again, two different skill sets. I mean, two different ways of telling stories. Talk to me about learning the craft elements for different audiences.
Sure. So also learning on the fly. I had been working on that other book and was just trying to figure it out. And my youngest son was not a big reader. He would go to the library and he would bring home books about the Loch Ness Monster and UFOs and the Abominable Snowman. I think they might have even been the In Search Of books. They were small picture books that talked about these mysteries of the universe, and really into the show Finding Bigfoot. And I thought, well, what if I write a story for him that he would be interested in reading? And so I started working on the book that became the Sasquatch of Hawthorne Elementary, which is about a boy who, is trying to look for Bigfoot in the woods across the street from the elementary school, because that's what my kid would do. And it was never supposed to go anywhere. I was actually kind of embarrassed about it because I was like, here's this Bigfoot book, and I'm a serious, grown up author, and I love this series and I love these books. And when I started working with my editor, because my agent at the time, Dawn Dowdle, put it out there. She didn't have a lot of experience. She had some picture book experience, but I was her first middle grade author, because I wasn't really supposed to be writing middle grade. It was just one of those things. And she said, "Hey, anybody got any mystery adventure for kids? Somebody's looking for it." And I said, "I have this little story about this boy looking for Bigfoot and this team of investigators trying to, solve this mystery." And she was like, "Send it my way." And she had her intern look over it and edit it and then send it out. And it ended up getting 2 offers. And when I signed with my editor for that book, she said, "Just so you know, you've got way too many adults meddling in this." And that was one of the biggest lessons that I learned was kids don't want to read about adults controlling their lives unless they then take revenge on them or, break free from that. That's the only time that you want to see that. And so she's like, these kids they're going to steal the boat. They're not going to be taken across in an orderly fashion by their parents. They're going to take the bus without their parents knowing in a foreign country and get stuck in a snowstorm with some strange woman, because that's the adventure that kids want to read about. And so you're going to have to set aside your mom brain for a minute and remember that kids want to feel like they have agency in their lives, and you're empowering them to think about themselves as being capable when you give them that agency. And so that was a huge lesson. We had to come up with a reason why my protagonist had such a high vocabulary. So I made him he's in the highly capable group because he talks a little bit, she's like, we're either going to have to, lower the vocabulary level, or we're going to have to give him a reason for why he talks the way that he does. And we made him highly capable and a reader, and, somebody who is able to have those conversations. And I've had teachers tell me, we had to look up some of the words as a class when we're reading the book together so that they are picking up. So I'm like, it's actually not a terrible thing. They're expanding the vocabulary.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And they're learning context. So this is a great story to tell people that an editor put out a call, your agent got your book in front of them. They said, yes, we love this. And now we're going to make you completely rewrite it because we love this story and you're a good writer.
Right.
But we're going to completely rewrite this. That's part of this process. And this is also for folks who are querying and doing things, if when an editor takes something on, doesn't mean they're not going to have thoughts about it. What they're saying is, you're a good writer and I'm invested in this story, and then we're going to fix it.
Right. Which was very surprising to me. So when my first Cruising Sisters, when my Cruising Sister series sold, which was my third series, the editor reached out to me with 15 pages worth of notes. I was like, I thought you liked my story. She's like, I do. That's why we're going to do this. And that was so helpful to me, because I was like, this isn't criticism. This is helpful to make. This person says this story can be, I'm going to help you make this the best that can be. And I think that was one of the things that I learned along the way in general, is that when I first started writing, I thought, if anybody even reads this and says something bad about it, I'm just going to throw it in the trash. So the steps that I took, where I had this friend of mine who looked at my story and did some editing, and she's like, I'm going to hold your hand while I tell you this. This is a good story, but here are some things that we're going to work on. Those things you see in red, it's going to be okay. And you take those steps, and then you have your next foray into, sending your stuff out. Like, this is a process that is not for somebody who can't take criticism. And I think that for me, the slow steps into learning how to take critique and recognize that people aren't saying things. I mean, I'm sure there are some people, but people aren't saying things to tear this down. It's because they see the potential and they want to get you there. And once you have that shift, it's so much easier to, it's never fun. Somebody told me, never open notes from your editor unless you are in an emotional place to read them, because it will undo you. But when you know that this person cares, and that's why they are investing so much time, energy, and effort into the story, that's a beautiful thing. And it's a great, how lucky am I that somebody is willing to take that time and invest their energy into my story.
And that's such an important shift as a writer, to welcome editing. And again, because if you hire an editor, you've got to, the editor's making your story better, not rewriting your story the way they'd write it. So that's the difference, is that they're making you a better writer. So, always go with your gut if you're working with an independent editor and you're not feeling that. But in a publishing house, they're invested in you, and that's great.
Right. They're putting, depending on the circumstances, even with an agent, like an agent who does editing with your work, they're literally doing work for free with the anticipation that this will pay off. And it's hard to get an agent these days. So if somebody's willing to take the chance on you and invest their time without a guarantee of what's going to come on the other end, take the chance, take the stuff and try to absorb it. And like you said, as long as you trust them, I think I've been very fortunate in that I trust the people who have had my work in their hands. So that helps.
And you're in it for the long haul, so that this isn't if some people are, it depends on what you want from your writing career, your publishing career. But, some people would have been happy with the Sasquatch series and that's it. That's, I did it. But you have been challenging yourself and you want a long career. So that means learning, adjusting, fixing, in your case, unfortunately finding, your agent passed away and she had so many people that she was supporting and helping that it really caused a moment in the mystery writing community when she passed. So, there are things you can never imagine are going to happen that just can happen for good and for bad.
For sure. And I think about that as well with what's going on in publishing as a whole, in the kid lit genre in particular. There are I had multiple conversations over the last week with people in all aspects of publishing kid lit who are like the book banning, the short attention spans. Like when I go and do a school visit with school, the kids are excited. The kids want books. If it's a book that's going to interest them, they get invested. So I think the desire is still there. I think the approach needs to be adjusted, but I'm lucky to live in a community in which books are not under attack. But there are a lot of communities, a lot of school districts that are pulling books for any number of reasons.
Right.
And it's going to harm the book industry, the kidlit book industry, the future of our children and our country. Like when you have kids that are discouraged from reading or are afraid to read anything that is outside of the immediate small bubble in which they exist, it will have devastating consequences.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for bringing that up and talking about that because it's such an important issue that is, as you said, it's affecting all levels of our society. And, as your first editor said, kids want to see something where they're breaking the rules or where it's different than their lived experience, or they want to sort of be excited about the possibilities. And that's part of reading. And, nobody should decide how to limit that ability for a kid.
Right. And I am my friend Alan Gratz, who is a very well accomplished author of middle grade and YA. He just announced that his book Refugee has been on the New York Times bestselling list for 6 years. That's not an easy book. That's not a fluffy book. That's not wizards and flying dragons. It's a tough book about really difficult experiences, and it's being read by children. And I went to his book launch for his latest book, and the place was packed. The girl next to me was fangirling so hard she was practically crying, and she said, "I've read every single one of his books," which is like 27 books.
Wow.
And he writes books with substance, and he writes books about diverse characters and diverse lived experiences. And the kids long for this. And so we really are robbing them. Well, some of us are trying not to, but
Yes.
they're
Yeah.
being robbed.
Yes. No, I completely agree. I completely agree. Well, I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit, even though we could keep talking about this for longer, but let's talk about your shift into writing for adults and what was that like for you?
So I technically signed with Dawn for my grown-up mystery. And then as we were reworking that, because I think that thing went through like 24 drafts. But as we were working through that book, I had some pacing issues, and so she was helping me on that. That's when the call came out for the middle grade book, and then we focused on trying to get the first book in the Chattertown series sold. I don't typically write the two series at the same time. I mean, I don't ever write two books at the same time anyway, but it is a mental shift for me. I like, and I tend to like read more of the opposite or listen on audiobooks to the opposite when I'm working on one. So I was just invited to participate in the Sisters in Crime panel about, we're going to be, I think, looking at Harriet the Spy. And so I downloaded Harriet the Spy. I'm like, I need a refresher on Harriet the Spy because it's been quite a while since I've read that book. And it's perfect because right now I'm working on a grown-up book. When I'm working on grown-up books, it's hard for me to read other grown-up books because they feel like, you take on what you're consuming. Like it just happens. And so I prefer to have them not happening at the same time. The books that I am looking at writing now. So right now I'm not contracted in my other two series anymore. I've not signed a contract for book 4 in either series at this point because I needed to do a book 4 for the kids series. And I had this other book that I wanted to write inspired by this missing person case. And because I had a new agent and I wanted to provide something for her to sell. And so with that, I have started working on a brand new series. And I would say that when I just am I compartmentalize it. They're just very different mindsets. And I always do a ton of research before I start anything. And so I start to get into the mindset of what I'm going to be doing while I'm researching the topic and filling a notebook and preparing for that. I'm much more of a plotter than I ever used to be. So I think that helps. I think I'm much more structured. I start getting in the mindset. I start consuming all the stuff that fits with whatever it is I'm going to be writing, and then I go from there.
So the novel inspired by this 1967 case was the first novel that you wrote, and then you've done other things. Is that the novel that you're working on now, or is it or did you say, this is how I learned how to write a book, let me put this away and let me start this idea because it's I can't imagine, it's a huge pull. Let me start this again.
So I think when I first started writing inspired by that story, there were elements of that I was bringing in. There's somebody that's found floating dead in the marina, and somebody had gone missing. But at the time, I was really nervous about writing the story close, even moderately close to the true story, out of respect for the family of the missing young man, worried about how my mom would feel. Remember, I still had my mother over my shoulder because I'm like, I want to write something that she's proud of me to write. And it's a really tough way to write a story. And so that story just shifted so much that by the time that it was done, it really only had a couple elements of the initial story. Then in 2019, it was discovered while I was doing genetic genealogy that he's actually the biological father of my older sister. And that brought this story much closer to home and made the urgency to try to discover what had happened to him much more of it just became kind of a mission for me. So I began studying the case and really trying to understand the case starting in 2019, compiling all the information, everything. And I've really gotten to the point where I'm this close to having figured out what happened, but because it's not solved and I don't have those answers, then I had to fictionalize it. And so I shifted the story to 1976 so that there could be more current day tension and danger, because a lot of the people who were alive and menacing situations in 1967 are no longer alive. And so in order for there to be, for that danger to still be present in the present timeline, I had to shift the timeline. I did fictionalize things because I'm worried about defamation. But it's much, much, much closer to the original story. It takes place in Southern California, which is where he went missing. He was a dock boy for a seaplane company. I've been interviewing, family members of the owners of the seaplane company. I've been interviewing dock boys. I've been interviewing, I've been talking to a woman who was the port commissioner at the time. Like there's all different, or not at the time, but since then, who had studied the history of the area and stuff. And so this book is much closer to that actual story. And because of the familial connection and with the permission of my mother and my sister, I felt more confident in writing closer to the truth. It is still very, very difficult. I would much rather write a complete, straight out of my brain fictional story than try to come up with a fictional story about a real life thing when you know that people are being represented, are going to read it.
Yes. No, well, thank you for giving us all that backstory, because just the weight of all of this must be a lot for you also and your family to just sort of navigate. But it's also fascinating that you're, the detective part of you, you're fictionalizing the story and you're setting in 1976 and you're gonna make stuff up, and the fiction writer is on it. But I can imagine that in 10 years we'll be sitting here talking, and your true crime book that came out with the facts will also be part of what you've put out.
I would hope so. When I was speaking with my agent about it, she's like, I really would discourage you from writing this as true crime. So, because you don't have an answer. But you also have to let go some of the truth in order to serve the story. And that's where the real battle was. And so when I got back to starting to write a fictional story that was completely fictional, other than the fact that it was inspired by this new series I'm working on, was inspired by my daughter working at the vital records department for the health department. Other than that fact that it was inspired by that, everything else is fictional and out of my brain, and it feels like a vacation compared to the last book. I have been wrestling. I've gotten to the point where I can write a book in 2 to 3 months, and this one took me a full year and a full rewrite.
Wow. So will this, do you envision, so talk to him the difference, and I might be conflating. Is this a standalone, this 1976 book, or is it the beginning of a new series?
So it's written as a standalone. I suppose there's a possibility that it could be a series. I'm still waiting to hear back about the second draft to see whether she hates it, because I sent it to her and I said, I don't know if I love this or hate this. I'm too close. So I'm waiting to hear whether she feels that I had addressed a lot of the concerns that she had in the first draft, which were that it was more, she's like, too much talking. There's too much talking. And I'm like, I'm so used to talking about this story with people as I'm, working through this. And there's so much interesting stuff to talk about that I can see why it's too much talking. Because that's what I do. I talk about the story because it's fascinating to me.
So this could be the story that you wrestle with for years and years until you get it.
There's a possibility of that, which is why after I sent it to her, I immediately started writing a new series. So that if she comes back to me and says that she is like, still no, that I have something else in the works.
And this is your agent. So this is another conversation. If your agent could love it, but say, I don't know we can't sell this.
Yep.
And your agent can also give you advice. So it's not. And so at some point you could say, I'm going to indie publish this because it's, the book of my heart and I want this to get out there. But those are business decisions that you make, along the way.
Right.
So you may or may not be the kind of person who wants to talk about a work in progress, but tell me about what inspired you with any of your series. The idea that, this will support a series. This is the idea. This is the world I can build that's going to support a series. Tell me about coming together there.
I feel like that was different with each. I actually had this conversation with my husband the other day in relation to my kids series, because I had this amazing school visit, just really heartwarming. And I came home and I was like, maybe I really do need to write another kids series, because my fourth book is out. I don't know if there will be a fifth book, because of the state of things. And maybe I really do want to keep my foot in the kid world, but I didn't set out thinking, these Sasquatch kids are going to be, I never imagined any of this. Every time I stand up in front of hundreds of kids talking about this book, I think, how in the heck did this happen?
Sure.
And so when you have that experience, you're like, there's luck involved here. And it wasn't a master plan. And so it makes you question whether you can do that again. You can come up with another idea that's compelling or whatever. And so I think for me, I look at the idea that I have and I think to myself, would I find this interesting? And then I try to see where I think that it could click. And the other thing that I learned between my Chattertown Mystery Series and my Cruising Sisters Mysteries is how important the hook is. So when you go to market a series like my Chattertown Mysteries, which is a small town amateur sleuth working for a small newspaper, Dawn had said, well, what's the hook? And I'm like, I don't know, because I didn't know that was a thing until, I started doing all of this. And so when I was working on the Cruising Sisters, I thought, well, this is something that is much more hooky. It's definitely easier to market. When I go to buy, make swag, nautical stuff is really easy to find, and people love to go on cruises, and so I have been trying to keep in mind the things that will make it easier to resonate with people, that they'll look at it. Paula likes to say a lot, is it high concept? Most of the time I'm like, I don't know. Like, I keep trying to figure out what high concept is, because I know that that's what publishers are looking for. They're looking for that thing that can be just easily understood in one sentence. I struggle with that, but this series that I'm currently working on now is inspired by, as my daughter was working at the health department and working the vital records department, she was telling me about her day, and she said, well, I got assigned to the death desk today. And I said, what's the death desk? And she said, well, that's when you're processing death records, and nobody wants it, so they're always drawing straws for it. And I thought, the death desk is a darn good title for a book. And so that's all where it came from, was what would happen? What would cause somebody who was working at a vital records department processing death records, what would get her involved in a murder mystery? And I came up with an idea and have been working on it from there. And so sometimes you just got to look for those little things that just make your brain go, oh, I like that.
Yeah. And then start gathering the idea starts gathering the people and the place and everything else. So it becomes this, force that you can center your series around. Do you imagine that this will be cozy? It doesn't sound,
It's tough because all of my stuff is cozy adjacent. I don't love including a lot of profanity. Usually I don't include any, but I did write a short story for Noir at the Bar and publicly said the F word and made everybody stop and clap. Because I was like, I'm about to say something that I don't normally say. I don't like a lot of violence, so I think I'm naturally more drawn toward
traditional,
things that are cozy-ish.
Yeah.
I'm always cozy adjacent, just because my stuff is fairly clean. But the thing that's been fascinating as I've been researching this series is learning about grief, learning about the commodification of the death industry, learning about shady or criminal coroners or funeral home directors. Like, there's so many interesting aspects. And because I don't like to think about death at all, despite being a murder mystery writer, the cozy mystery thing and the no violence on page kind of desensitizes you to the fact that we're talking about death. We're talking about violence, and it's in a very soft package. And so having to come face to face with death and grief and all of this stuff, like, I've been reading 1-star Yelp reviews of funeral homes and crematoriums, and there's a lot there, a lot.
Yeah, when you go down a research rabbit hole at topics like that, you can find things. And again, you'll be taking notes, and this can be a book idea or whatever, but it's truth is stranger than fiction. I mean, that if you wrote this story, your agent would say, nobody's going to believe that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I watched the documentary, The Mortician, on HBO, and it's about this family funeral home in Pasadena, California, that in the 80s was up to all sorts of things. And it's hard to even comprehend.
Yeah. Yeah. What a world. What a world we're living in. So what do you know now that you wish you'd known then? The finishing. You're finishing, your comment about finishing, I think, is the t-shirt. I mean, that's the tattoo. That's
Right.
You got to finish. Just for your own sake, just finish the book. Don't worry about the publishing thing. Just finish the book. But what else, as you've been going on, you've published a lot of books, and you're a working author. So what do you wish you'd understood at the beginning of this journey?
So there are a couple of things that come to mind. When I started noodling this book in 2004, the very first book that I was going to end up writing, like I said, I couldn't imagine taking criticism on it. I was so thin-skinned and so self-conscious and so lacking so much confidence. And when I look over the years and the steps and everything, I realize that for me, the success had to come in bite-sized pieces. If I looked too far, I do have some big goals now. One of my goals is to see one of my books in Times Square up on the big billboard. Mm-hmm. That's a goal. One of my goals is that one of my books is mentioned as a question on Jeopardy, or an answer, I guess, technically. Those are pie in the sky goals, right? If I were to be sitting in 2004 looking at this little notebook in my little, temporary rental house and think, so in 2026, you will have your 10th published novel and, be in the conversation with people that you're reading right now. that would be overwhelming to me. So I'm just much more about the celebrating every single success that you accomplish, and making small goals. Success to me looks like achieving the next thing. It looks like overcoming the next obstacle. You know, sometimes it's about rewriting a book and getting to the end of it, and you may still hate it, but you finished that. Or you know, just stepping out there and querying in the very first place and getting your first rejection. Like, all of these things are accomplishments because you have stepped into the arena. You're challenging yourself, pushing yourself, and you become much more prepared for the next thing with every step that you take. And so my advice to my younger self would be, it's okay. You're going to just take this one step at a time, and just keep moving forward, because that's the name of the game.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk to me about the importance of community in your writing journey.
So that was one of the first things that I did after getting an agent. And it was because I had no idea that these communities existed. I did not know about Sisters in Crime. I did not know about MWA or SCBWI, which is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. I knew nothing about any of it. So up until the moment that I signed with my agent and she said, I know you got off of Facebook because it's toxic, but you're going to have to come back on because this is where my community of authors are and this is where we support each other. That was my first step back. That was my first step into community with a group of writers, because up until that point, I was on my own. I didn't know who to ask about anything. It's one of the reasons why I had no idea what the appropriate word count was for a novel. Like I knew nothing, and I had no idea where to turn or who to ask. And when I signed with Dawn, she said, you need to get yourself in the Guppies right away. This is where you need to be. The Guppies is the best place for somebody who is so new that she's gleaming. Like, you need to get yourself in this community, and it's such a supportive group. And I found that to be the case. And I was surprised to see how many accomplished authors were still in the Guppies, because they're like, here's where I thrived, and now I'm going to stick around and be here for other newbies as they come in. Because if we aren't pulling people up with us and surrounding these people who are terrified and know nothing about anything, just like we were, what are we doing? So that was between Dawn's little Facebook group of authors and then the Guppies. And then eventually I did join MWA and SCBWI. Like, I started realizing the value of the community, so that if any, it's not just about answering questions. It's about being able to look at somebody and say, here's where I'm struggling. And they'll go, I've been there, and here's what I did, and here's somebody else you could talk to. Like, I attend these conventions. My husband's like, you are becoming a professional convention goer. I'm like, it's not just because it's a vacation. It's because when I stay connected to people and I'm meeting people and I'm learning things from every single person that I encounter, and I just feel like I don't think I could do this alone. I don't know that I could. And so I just feel really fortunate to have been pointed in the direction of the Guppies from the outset of my career. Literally the day that I signed with her, she's like, here's what you're going to want to do.
I will put the link to the Guppies in the show notes for this. They are an online chapter of Sisters in Crime, and they are an amazing learning resource for folks at all stages. As we've been sort of doing this dance around these conversations, needing support or figuring stuff out doesn't ever stop. Right. Publishers got a business, or this happens or that happens. And, you've got to adjust, and nobody understands what you're going through better than another writer.
For sure. In fact, I had to reach out to someone just within the last month or two um, to find out how they wrote a multi POV synopsis, because I'd never done that before. And I sent a synopsis for a multi POV book and was told that I had not done it correctly. And I'm like, well, I've never done this before. And so I reached out to somebody that wrote a multi POV book and said, how do you write a multi POV synopsis? And so it was, that was just a couple of months ago.
So, Kate, for folks listening to this, how do you write a multi POV? Do you write from different points of view?
You do not. You do not.
So you just tell the story.
You're going to tell the story, and even with a multi POV, you have a protagonist. You have one person that really is your protagonist, even though, which I think for me was a little bit easier. So just to back up, the first draft of the book was single POV. And when my agent looked over it, she said, I think this needs to be multi POV, and here's why, and here are some things that I think need to happen. And so that required the full rewrite. And I think because it started out as a single POV, it was a little bit easier for me to see who was the protagonist when you're giving multiple points of view. But yeah, you're supposed to focus on your protagonist, even though it is a multi POV. So maybe only a sentence or two. I was head hopping all over the place in my initial synopsis, and she's like, "Yeah, that makes zero sense. This is not how this works." So yeah, no, it's challenging.
Yeah. Well, and look at you. I mean, going from writing a short story and figuring that out to now multiple points of view and, inspired by and launching new series and kids lit and becoming an advocate for children's literature as well. And, everything else. I mean, what a journey you've been on so far, and you're just starting. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah. My for anybody who feels like it's too late or whatever, I was a stay-at-home mom for almost 30 years of 4 kids. I supported my husband's career as we moved from state to state. And I had my first book published at 50 and my 10th book published at 53. So
it's amazing.
I make it up for lost time. And I think that, some of it is just that a lot of it has been just building up and just ready. Like I was ready for my second act because my kid graduated high school and
yeah. And also you're ready when opportunity comes, you've got to be ready. That's what luck is. It's preparation meets opportunity. I mean, there's some magic in the world as far as the writing and the art, but opportunity meets preparation. If you weren't ready when that opportunity came from Dawn to say, does anyone have a middle? And you had hesitated to say, well, I don't, you didn't. You said, yeah, I've got something if you want to read it. That's what it takes, is the confidence, even if you have to fake it, the confidence to say, yeah, I've got a book here. Why don't you take a look at this? Right?
Yeah. I mean, and really 10 years of therapy helped, because I was able to start to recognize the things that I wanted for myself, and to realize that what other people think about me is not my business, and that helps. Mm-hmm. To prepare yourself for a career where you are going to get feedback, and that feedback it's not the same feedback your mommy gives you.
Yes. No. Yes. Absolutely. Which, is why never read your own reviews. Have somebody read them for you and pull quotes. Don't do that to yourself.
Exactly.
Well, Kate, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And for folks listening, she mentioned the Harriet the Spy. Sisters in Crime does member-only reading like a writer, where authors are on a panel and they reread or read something and come at it from a writer's perspective, which is kind of a fun way to look at books. So, and Harriet the Spy is one of those texts that a lot of us read back in the day. So I hope you have fun on that panel.
I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Sisters in Crime is about community. We were founded to advocate for women crime writers, and we continue that mission by fighting for equity in the crime writing community. Sisters in Crime is an international, inclusive organization for all who write and love crime fiction, mystery, thrillers, and suspense. Join us at sistersincrime.org and make sure you subscribe to this podcast.